Okay, are you ready? I'm gonna switch. Okay, obviously that's not what switching is, right? And when we talk about a disorder like dissociative identity disorder, there's a lot of confusion around it. My friend at the Rewired Soul, Chris, he did a video recently about dissociative identity disorder and maybe how some people are faking it. And I had a little bit of uncomfort when I was watching that. I didn't really agree with everything that he was saying, or I felt like maybe the way he was saying it could have been a little bit stigmatizing, and I left a comment over on his video. But Chris tends to be, more in tune with all of the trends and stuff that's going on YouTube. I'm not really paying that close attention myself. So he, I believe, came across this something that was going on where maybe some people on YouTube with dissociative identity disorder, DID, either they were just claiming to have it, or they were pretending or faking, depending on what kind of words you want to use. Something was going on here, and he gave some examples, and I don't want to get into what Chris said and did because you can go watch it for yourself. I don't want to speak for him. To his credit, he apologized for some of the things that he said. You can go watch and see what he's apologizing for, which I commend him for because I don't always apologize for things. I know how hard it is for me to admit when I'm wrong about things. So kudos to you, Chris, for doing that. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about DID today, and I know I've been doing a lot of breakup videos, so some of you might be out there like, what is going on here? And why is he not outside? Because I'm always outside. Well, I am going to have to start doing videos inside because the winter is coming, so I started to put together like a little set here. I call it a set because this is not what my life looks like, but I want it to look this way on camera. And I wanted to jump in on this because this is a mental health channel, and just because I've been doing breakup stuff and relationship oriented kind of stuff recently, I'm going to continue making mental health videos, and maybe this will be a thing that I do every now and then to start commenting more on disorders and get back into the disorder videos a little bit, because it does kind of get repetitive talking about breakups over and over and over again. Now, it's been a really long time since I did a video about dissociative identity disorder. I think I only have one video, and it's just like a basic reading of the DSM, which we have back here, and I'm going to open that up in a minute to talk about some stuff. But Chris had a few concerns in his video. I wanted to kind of think about those and ramble on about them and just kind of like say what I have to think about these things. But I wanted to give a quick overview of dissociative identity disorder for anybody who doesn't know. And dissociative identity disorder is what it sounds like. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. They changed it because that wasn't really an accurate depiction of the illness. And it's dissociative identity disorder because dissociation seems to be at the core of what's happening and why people have these different personalities. We call them alters inside, and why different alters present themselves. And so let me just give like a quick rundown of the terminology here. Now, if you go into the DSM is only going to talk about things like dissociative amnesia, which is also its own little, I don't know if it's considered a disorder, but it's got its own little section in there. And dissociative amnesia is basically when you just forget stuff. And it's not like regular forgetting, it's like you lose a chunk of time, like you lose the access to whatever happened. It doesn't mean that it's permanent, but you do lose access to it. And we all experience like a little bit of dissociative amnesia when we go driving somewhere or walking somewhere, and we're maybe like daydreaming, and maybe we like totally zone out while we're doing that, and then we realize like, oh, I'm a block further than I was before, but I don't really remember that chunk in between. That's just basic dissociation, and that is a basic dissociative amnesia. I don't want to read the DSM word for word, but basically dissociative identity disorder involves having multiple alters, and alters are different personalities within one human body. So everybody that, typical people that don't have this disorder or disorders like it, we just have one in what's called integrated personality. We see a constant, continuous sense of ourselves over time. We never feel like there's more than one of us. We never feel like we're experiencing different mental states. We may have like shifts in mood that's different. We may have shifts in emotions that's different. This is having full, not always full, sometimes part, but different configurations of our personality separated from each other. They can sometimes cross and talk to each other, but they're not the same. And it's a little hard to explain because it's hard to even understand what's going on. Even the researchers don't have a full understanding because it's difficult to measure things that are going on in the brain. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit further. But dissociative identity disorder it's rare, but it's not so rare that like you probably in your network somewhere, even if it's far extended in the network, know somebody with dissociative identity disorder. If you know me, I know people online with dissociative identity disorder, so it's not super, super uncommon. And just to continue on, I don't want to give like a whole background on dissociative identity disorder, but typically it's thought that childhood trauma is the trigger for why this happens. Usually our personalities integrate while we're children, and so trauma interrupts that process. Again, this is just the thought. And then you wind up with different personalities, sometimes split off into, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 personalities, or you could have even 100 or so, and they're experienced, within the mind, within the body, within the head, but within our imagination. I don't want to say imagination because this is part of the problem with discussing this disorder. I do not want to stigmatize people who have dissociative identity disorder by making it seem in any way like they're just making it up, because they're not just making it up. It is a real disorder. It has been measured in the brain, and there is research on dissociative identity disorder to show that it is a real thing and people aren't just making it up. So let me be careful about how I phrase things here, but it is existing within somebody's mind. They're not psychotic. They don't believe that there's more than one of them. Like they realize like I have one body, and they and when I say they, I'm talking about like everybody within what's known as a system in a body. So multiple alters are all part of one system inside of a body. It would be like if I had, how do I explain this? It would be like if Chris was inside, this sounds horrible. If Chris was inside of my body and like there's me and then there's Chris and there's me and Chris, and we can still talk to each other. We just have to use the body to do it. And sometimes maybe we can both talk to each other because like we're controlling different parts of the mind so that we can both coexist at the same time. But other times maybe one has control over most of the mind and the other has to go behind. All right, this is getting a little too wacky for me, but that's kind of the gist of dissociative identity disorder. And anybody out there who has it, because I'm sure somebody will watch, let me know if I'm saying anything stigmatizing here or weird, because that's the last thing I want to do. And I do want to give some shout outs here to other channels where people who have dissociative identity disorder talk about having it. And those channels are ones that I have watched. Not everybody necessarily endorses me. I don't even know if everybody even knows that I'm here. But for example, there's Jeremy, I think it's Jeremy, an alternate perspective is the channel. There's the Labyrinth System. There's the Entropy System. There is Power to the Systems. There's MultiplicityAndMe. And there's plenty more out there. So if you're interested in learning from the perspective of somebody who has dissociative identity disorder, I would check at least some of those out. Now, it's worth mentioning here that, yes, in the DSM, they talk about how dissociative amnesia has to be present in order for dissociative identity disorder to exist. But dissociative amnesia doesn't have to be like I blank out completely. It could be that one alter takes over sometimes and another alter shows up another time, and the one alter who is fronting, as it's called, they don't remember what happened when the other alter was out. And maybe this is something I should make clear here as well. There's a lot of terminology around dissociative identity disorder that is not in that book, because these books are made just for clinicians to look at a set of symptoms, look at a set of behaviors, and decide what is the core problem, and then go from there. It's not meant to teach a clinician everything about a disorder. It's not meant to teach a clinician how to treat a disorder even. It's just identifying like what are the core things that make this a disorder in the first place. And I want to talk more about the DSM and some other problems, because this is something that Chris brought up as well. As I said, this is going to be a little rambly, and I'm just going to kind of interject thoughts here and there. And I just wanted to also say that I've experienced dissociation myself. I have PTSD. I don't know if I would still say that I have PTSD, but it has been a core problem of mine. And one of the symptoms of PTSD is dissociation in many people. And it's something that I experienced for most of my life, I feel. So I feel like I can personally relate at least to the experience of dissociation. And one of the issues that Chris had brought up was this idea of switching on camera, and how could you switch on camera when this is such an involuntary thing? How do I put this? If there's more than one alter, then you can switch on camera. If you have dissociative identity disorder, like, it can just happen on camera because it's happening throughout the day, probably, depending on how your disorder manifests. So it's absolutely possible that you could be on camera and catch it. For me, myself, well, first let's just put it out there. There is a study that was done with a woman who had dissociative identity disorder who said that she was able to switch on command. And this, I think, was more what Chris was having an issue with, was like, how could you make yourself switch? And this woman apparently could, and they put her in, I believe, an fMRI machine, and they observed that different areas of the brain lit up when she said she was doing the switching. I will link to the study because I'm not that familiar with it, but it's one study of one person who said that they could control it. And what I will say for myself is that I can make myself dissociate. Now, I can't do it to the point, like, I've had involuntary dissociation where something has triggered me and I have just gone, like, totally woozy is the best way I can describe it, and not really been present and not been able to control it and not been able to get out of it. But there is something that I can do, and I don't know why exactly, but I can dissociate, like, to a moderate amount. Maybe everybody can do this, I don't know. But it's similar to zoning out, and I'll take a moment and do it right here on camera in front of you. So here we go. I will dissociate. And right now I'm dissociating, so I'm talking to you. For me, it looks like the camera is crossed. It's like I crossed my eyes. I don't know if you see crossed eyes. I don't think you do. But my visual system crossed things, not very much. Like, I see two cameras. And that's like a very mild dissociation for me. And this will happen to me if I'm studying something hard and it's like really boring, or my mind is like, really, I'm still dissociated. There, okay, so I took myself out. It's not like a big deal to me. But my mind will do this if something's like really stressful and I'm taxing all of my energy, or if something feels a little bit traumatic, or it reminds me of a traumatic trigger. But it's so mild that it's manageable, and as I said, I can, like, as I just demonstrated, I can do it, like, to myself if I wanted to. So I don't know if that's any kind of a proof that you can do dissociation voluntarily. I don't know, but that's my experience. And by the way, this is not to, like, dismiss Chris or put him down in any way, because there's no right answer here. We don't have proof of exactly what's going on. You know, we have some studies we can look at for a reference, but I think it's important when we talk about mental health to be open to different ideas. There's a lot of people who have ideas about things that I disagree with, but I think it's good that we at least talk about them. And through that process of talking, sometimes we can come up with really interesting conclusions. You know, when narcissism is something that I've been very interested in, and there were two major researchers in that area for a very long time, Otto Kernberg and, oh gosh, I'm going to forget the name now, Kohut. I can't think of his first name. He passed away. And they both had very different ideas about what was going on with narcissism and how to treat it, but the two of them together really, I think, reshaped the field and helped us learn how to treat it. So I think it's really important that we have different ideas out there and discuss things differently. So, you know, Chris's opinion is his opinion, my opinion's my opinion, and neither one of us is really right because we don't have the answers, and we're not even really disagreeing on all points, and sometimes I may be misunderstanding him and he may misunderstand me, although I'm really responding to him here, but he can speak for himself, and I don't know, I just don't want to make it sound like we're feuding or anything. All right, but I do want to get into a little bit of the book, the DSM. So we have two major ways of looking at disorders and diseases, mental disorders, and that is the DSM, and we have the ICD. And The DSM, when it comes to dissociative identity disorder, sorry, I've got like cat hair flying around, that has a few dissociative disorders in it. Not that many. You've got depersonalization, derealization, you've got dissociative amnesia, dissociative identity disorder, and then you've got, I don't even know the name of it, other specified dissociative disorder, something like that. And then there's like different like ways of classifying that. So I do want to make clear here that even, if you don't have dissociative identity disorder, the way that it's defined, there's also other avenues for having dissociative problems. And I think when we think about the DSM and all of these diagnoses in general, we should be aware that they're just guidelines. This is kind of what I was getting at before, is that they're just meant to kind of like pinpoint a problem, but it doesn't mean that you have to meet the criteria 100% to have a problem. And it doesn't mean that, if you match some things from here and some things from there, like you can have multiple problems and you don't have to, it's really just a guideline to help people get treatment. It really shouldn't be about fitting into a perfect box or matching things perfectly. And I say this because I come from the idea, I don't know if this is just like my thing, but I like all the old psychoanalytic ways of looking at things where you see people as people, or at least that's the way that I kind of interpreted all of that, is you see people as people and you talk to them and you find out what's their problem and you see what you can do to help them. And, the categories and everything came into the DSM around DSM-3, I believe it was, to legitimize the field, because too many people, especially insurance companies, were saying, we need to know like that you're actually doing something and you're not just bringing somebody in and treating them for years and years, using up the insurance money just because you feel like it, or maybe you're creating a problem that's not really there. So it's understandable why we have these categories, but I think we also have to take a step back and recognize that people have problems, and those problems are not always perfectly defined in categories. Okay, so let me get this book because I've been wanting to open it and read about this idea of faking dissociative identity disorder, or faking mental illness in general, because that is a stigma that's out there against mental illness altogether, one that bothers me a lot, because there are people who just believe that mental illness in general is not even a thing. It's all just made up. It's because people don't want to take responsibility for their lives. And that's not true, but it's a belief out there, and I'm okay with people having that belief, but I disagree with it. And there are ways that we classify people who lie and people who do make things up, and people who are attention seeking, and I want to talk about some of those, and that's going to help me be able to do it. Okay, so I'm going to be reading from the book. You're going to see me like looking down into the DSM-5 is what I have. And we're going to start in the section for somatic symptom and related disorders. I'm going to give you overviews. I don't want to bog you down with this crap because honestly, it's not that interesting. And if it was so interesting, then I would have, made videos and videos about it. But it's a real thing that people go through, and it's something legitimate. And I don't want to dismiss anybody who's experiencing any of these disorders, but we don't talk about it that much. And I feel like the field in general, I don't know, it's not focused on. Maybe this will help bring some attention to it. Maybe we don't talk about it because we don't want people to believe that mental illnesses are made up. But we have ways of classifying this stuff. So one disorder is somatic symptom disorder, and basically it's having real symptoms of something, but then like obsessing about them and focusing on those symptoms and really kind of like magnifying them. And this can be, something that you experience along with many other disorders. And again, this goes to my thinking of like, we shouldn't box people into one classification or not, because the brain is very complicated with many different systems, and most of these illnesses are related to our neurological system, which feeds into the rest of our body. And to try to classify it it's misunderstanding that the brain has processes that are constantly running and interacting with each other, and to try to classify those. It's important that we do, but what we have right now is not accurate because we don't have good ways to measure the brain, good enough ways, but we're working towards that. Okay, so we also have illness anxiety disorder, which is preoccupation with having or acquiring a serious illness. So somebody doesn't have an illness, but they're worried that they're going to get it. Okay, so there's also conversion disorder, and you may have heard of conversion disorder before. It's basically when you have a symptom of something or some kind of weird abnormality, but there's no underlying cause for it. Like, for example, your arm just goes limp and there's no real reason why it's limp. Like if somebody were to x-ray it, if they were to run the neurological tests to see if it's functioning, everything is perfectly fine. So it's basically a psychological reason why the arm is doing that. And this is, again, I'm oversimplifying all of these, but I want to give you some ideas of what things that look like faking it could be. There's also factitious disorder, and factitious disorder is when you make up a disease or you make up a problem, but there's no obvious reason why you would do that. So there's no, for example, like when people make things up, sometimes they do this because they get pity or they get attention or they get money or they get things for making up an illness. But in this case with factitious disorder, there's no obvious thing that somebody's actually getting. They just say that they have problems when there's no real problem there. So they believe it, you know, they really think there's a problem, but there's no reward, there's no benefit to having that problem. So you could say that they're making something up, but it's still a mental illness. It's not that they're just trying to manipulate somebody, but that's bringing me to my next one. So this one was actually taken out of like the main section of the DSM altogether and just looked at for further research, and it's called malingering. It was in the DSM, but in DSM-5 they moved it out and said like we need to like examine this a little bit more. But malingering is when you make up an illness specifically to get some kind of a reward. And you could see how this might be linked to something like antisocial personality disorder, where somebody with that personality disorder is intentionally deceitful to people, and they're usually manipulative, and they may use malingering or making up a disorder or a mental illness or some kind of illness to try to get something from other people, whether that be money, attention, fame, like whatever. And this might be maybe what Chris was concerned about when he saw some of these YouTube people, and I should say I haven't seen any of these. I just don't care. I haven't really been out there looking to see what it was that he was seeing, and I have no doubt, because this is YouTube, that people will make up anything on YouTube to get views and get clicks and everything. So I'm sure that this is happening out there somewhere, but this may be what he was concerned about, people just making things up. And Chris, if you're watching, feel free to comment below, because I'm probably going to get some of this stuff wrong. And as I'm reminding everybody, go see like what Chris had to say if you're interested. But this is just kind of like my thinking and my response to some of these ideas that are out there. There's also the possibility that when somebody makes something up or makes up a mental illness or a symptom or something, that they're just being impulsive, and it's like the first thing that comes out of their mouth before they have a chance to think about it. And then once it comes out, they don't have the chance to think about it, or they're too afraid to think about it, and they just like go with it. And that's you know, they just stick with the first thing that came out of their mouth because it feels threatening to go against what they just said. And that's something that I've experienced a long time ago in my life, where I would say things and then feel like I didn't want to go against myself. Like, I don't know, it's hard to explain these things, but these are personality problems. And I guess what I want to say here is that you don't have to have like a full-blown mental disorder to have a problem with your personality. It can be a fluctuating thing that just happens because you're stressed out in the moment. It can be something that you're having a stressful life event. You know, disorders can come and go in people's lives. And you don't have to have what we call like a full-blown disorder to have a problem. So I just want to open everybody's mind here to this idea that, you know, when we talk about these things and we talk about if somebody's lying or faking or making things up, what is it that we're really trying to prove when we say this? Or what is it that we're concerned about? Now, Chris had said he was concerned about the professionals misdiagnosing things, and maybe I'm just going to extrapolate here, maybe having not good enough statistics to measure things, and maybe not really helping people with the real conditions and the real problems that they have, because we're mixing up the information, and we're just kind of like putting everything in a bucket, that like widening things a little bit too much, where maybe the scope needs to be a little bit more narrowed so that we can really help people with the problems that they have, and not people who are just kind of like casually have issues that really aren't that pressing. I think that's maybe what Chris was kind of getting at here. And especially people just making stuff up is not quite as much of a problem as somebody who lives and experiences dissociative identity disorder each and every day. And of course, people in the mental health community and clinicians and researchers are concerned about this as well, because this does drain time and attention and money and resources for actual treatments, for the staff at hospitals and the staff in therapy practices. Like, we're understaffed worldwide when it comes to psychological services and mental health services. So obviously we need every resource we can get, and to have people just making things up and doing things for attention, not so great. And while I say attention, something else is coming to mind. A lot of people, mental health in general, there's this big stigma that a lot of it's just for attention. Now, attention seeking, as I've mentioned many times before here on my channel, is a personality trait, a maladaptive personality trait that we see under narcissistic personality disorder. But as I said, personality traits can be a problem for anybody. And you can have, for example, avoidant personality disorder and still be attention seeking. Like, you don't have to have just that set of personality traits. Most people have like varying levels of your personality traits depending on the time of day and the time of year and like what you're going through, and things fluctuate. And that's how these disorders can all of a sudden emerge and sometimes go away. But we know that they typically emerge during specific time periods because of changes that are happening in the brain. I'm getting like way too complicated here, but when it comes to attention seeking in particular, attention seeking is a personality trait, and yes, it is a problem, and yes, it is treatable, but we should recognize that it is attention seeking for what it is, and we should also not just claim that everything is attention seeking, because attention seeking is something very specific. And unfortunately, there's a lot of disorders where people do a lot of things that look like they're for attention seeking. I mentioned impulsivity. There's people with bipolar who have mood swings, and it might look like attention seeking to somebody who's not used to seeing a manic episode, for example. Or there could be somebody who's depressive and doesn't have the motivation, to like get up out of their bed, and somebody might say, well, you're just seeking attention, that's why you're doing that. Like, we put these motivations on why people do things, and this is the backwards thinking that I would like to see the mental health community fight back against, because I come from the idea and understanding that we should really try to understand somebody first and why they do the things that they do, and that's going to help us to pinpoint what the issue really is. Why are you doing X, Y, and Z? Why are you on camera switching? Now, if somebody's on camera switching because it's just a daily part of their lives and it's what they experience and they want to help you understand their disorder, then like, okay. But if somebody's on camera switching because it gets them views, it gets them likes, and it gets them attention, that's another story. And I think Chris was acknowledging that, and I think that that is something that we need to be concerned about. But in general, especially with something like dissociative identity disorder, because it does stem from trauma, I always get a little bit cautious, because trauma, when you invalidate somebody who's experienced trauma, and this is something that I've gone through, and this is something that I hated and made things very difficult for me, when you invalidate somebody who's experienced trauma, what you do is you make it harder for them to heal from their disorder, and you make them feel not heard. I'm not going to get into all of it. It's invalidating somebody who has gone through trauma is very destructive, and it's not helpful. And I fear that when we tell somebody that they're seeking attention, or we judge somebody for what they're going through, and when those cases when we're wrong and and they have experienced trauma, we're really doing a lot of damage. We're really hurting that person. We could be setting them back for years if it makes them feel like they can't trust mental health professionals at all, or they can't even trust another human being because they already have a hard time trusting because of trauma. That's my fear when we talk about attention seeking. Whew, this is a long one, huh? I have a lot to say about these things. I keep it all inside. So I put the book back and the DSM, and I wanted to just mention that the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases, which is kind of like the other way that we look at mental disorders and mental illnesses, they just released the ICD-11. I don't believe it's technically in effect. It is official, but it's not like out there official. And they have changed a number of things, one of which I love, which is that they did away with all the personality disorder names, and now you just look at personality traits, which I think I could do a whole series on that, and I did do a series on personality traits a long time ago if you're interested. But the dissociative disorders in particular, they have dissociative neurological symptom disorder, dissociative amnesia, trance disorder, possession trance disorder, dissociative identity disorder, partial dissociative identity disorder, depersonalization, derealization disorder, other specified dissociative disorders, and dissociative disorders unspecified. And I've read that off because I want to show that things continually evolve in the mental health world, and these snapshots of the DSM and the ICD, they're just the most up-to-date knowledge that we have at the moment. And I believe the DSM-5 is from 2013, so the information in there is already 5 years old, and while it's still valid enough to use in clinical applications, we need to continually revise the way that we look at these things, and we need to continually learn about mental health and mental illnesses. I understand that not everybody in the population cares enough to do that, and why they don't care enough to do that, and that's perfectly fine. But I think in general, if we're going to talk about mental health, we have to recognize that things are complicated, and these books, while they are useful and they are important, and these classification guides, they are not the be-all, end-all, because we still don't know enough about the brain and the systems in the brain and the processes that are running to know everything that's going on. And so that's why it is important to talk with people who have lived experience, because it's important to understand what they're going through, and ultimately each person can tell us best what they feel is going wrong and what they define as their problems. So that was a really long rant about a lot of different things, but I don't know. Chris's video just got me thinking a lot, and I think he has a lot of valid points, a lot of valid concerns. I think this is a conversation that never really ends, but I wanted to add my voice to the conversation, maybe give you guys some perspective on where I sit on everything. And I kind of would love to do more of these kinds of things. I have had this idea just floating around, and it's probably going to float there for a long time because I'm not ready for any of this. But I have had this kind of idea of looking into like the different debates and the different ways of looking at mental health and why we choose to look at it the way we do and what are the alternatives. But that would be very involved, and it's not something I think a lot of people are interested in. Even if you're interested in it, I don't think the general population is interested in it. And I'm trying to grow this channel right now, so I can't really focus on those things as much as I would love to nerd out on them myself. So Chris, if you're watching, thank you for giving me this topic to kind of like go crazy on, because I like talking about all these different kinds of ideas. I don't get to very often because, as I said, I don't think people in general are very interested, but my brain and I just love all this stuff. So thank you for that. And maybe we'll see more of it in the future. I don't know. But for now, I will be returning to breakup stuff. I have a breakup video that is already ready, which I'm probably going to put out as an extra. I had issues with uploading this week. If anybody actually pays attention to my upload schedule, I had issues. But so maybe I'll do like a little extra on Saturday, which I normally wouldn't do. Breakups are my focus for now, but things will be changing soon for the channel. as I mentioned in my last video, my big long rambling one. This is another big long rambling one. But things will be changing, and as they always do here on my channel, and I may start to talk a little bit more about the mental health issues every now and then, because I don't want people to feel like this isn't a mental health channel. It absolutely is. I'm absolutely interested in mental health and doing what I can to help further understanding and empathy, and I don't know, whatever I can do, that's what I'm here to do. So thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about what I have to say. And if you have something to say, leave it down below. I would love to hear it. Take care, everyone.